Hi, thanks so much for being here. Can you hear me? I can't know. Otherwise, thanks so much for being here early. My husband was saying, "Oh, you're going all the way. What if there's absolutely no one? What time will you be back? It'll be 15 minutes." So I'm really happy to see lots of people sitting here. So I'm Suparna. I founded an organization in 2002 called Angan, which works on child protection. There are two big pieces of our work. The first piece started with us working with victims and survivors who had been rescued from child marriage, from child trafficking, from factories where they were working in hazardous work, child laborers and exploitation, and they were brought into government homes, into rescue homes and shelters, which was supposed to be care for them, which was supposed to be protection for them. But they were, in fact, in those days, extremely prison like. And Angan's work was really to improve those and improve the care and conditions. So that was the first sort of decade of our work and really informs what we do now. The second piece of our work is really about thinking about what brings children to a state where they're in what used to be called a remand home. How does it happen? How do those multiple levels of exploitation and abuse bring them here? And what can we do much earlier in the process when it comes to child trafficking and child marriage and child labor? So, my story, Angan's story, actually starts like about 100 years ago when I was 29 and a half. And in those days, I thought 30 is really old. So I better start doing now. I would never say it. To me, 50 is the new 30. But I thought to myself, now I have to be doing what I really want to do in life. And I used to be in advertising, and it was a lot of fun. Good money, great people, constant creative stimulation. I think it was the kind of work that taught me that, work has to be enjoyable, it has to be inspiring, it has to, you have to have fun at work every day. But at the same time, and I don't know if this happens to you, there are moments when you feel like I'm a guest here. I'm a tourist here, I'm having a lot of fun, but I don't really belong here yet. And I think when I was 30, I came to that sort of decision that now is the time when I have to go home. I have to be where I belong. It's been a lot of fun and doing a lot of other things. And so I started Angan. I'm often asked by funders, why did you start Angan? And I don't have a great answer to that because I feel it happened very organically. I had started volunteering when I was 12 years old or something. And not with the best sort of intentions. I had a crush on some boy when I was 12 and a half, and he said to me that, "Arey, I'm going here, I'm going to volunteer at this place." And I said, "Great, I'll also go, I'll get to spend time with him, and this will be a lot of fun." And I went there. And I don't know when, but he sort of disappeared from my mind. And I think I did start falling in love with that work, with working, going to a street shelter for street kids, going there. I would go, I remember even during exams, my mother would say to me, "Again, you're going over there, why don't you sit and study?" But it must have stayed in me. And then, of course, you have to do practical things. You have to start working and you have to start, going to your, start earning and stuff. So I did take the advertising part. But so 30 was a very important milestone for me when I said, okay, now is the time to really do what I have to do. So Angan's work, like I told you, because we work with victims and with children at risk of being trafficked, being married early, of being in hazardous work, really has justice very much at the center of what we do. And I know justice means a lot of different things to a lot of people. It's such a big sort of word. And when we think of it in the context of trafficking, we're sometimes thinking about laws and retributive justice and what happens to victims and how can they claim their rights. But when I think of my experience with justice and Angan's experience with actually more with injustice and how we see it up close, one of the things that really strikes me is how silence and justice and injustice really go hand in hand. And when I'm thinking of milestones in Angan's journey, um, silence and breaking that silence has been very much a key sort of part of the change. And I think anybody who works in social justice will say to you that it is silence of exploited people, of victims, that finally, when that changes, that's when you see justice actually supposed to happen. So I just wanted to share a few instances of how we looked at silence, how we recognized it, and how we tried to work around that as an organization. I just want to say silence. When I think about silence, I'm not thinking so much about quiet. I read somewhere that the difference between quiet and silence. That's like me. Very often I cannot find my phone to put it on. The difference between quiet and silence is that quiet is really, I guess you'd associate the word with, something more serene, something calm, something that you choose to do. And it's a strong word, it's a word about stillness. But think of the word silence. Think of the word silence that goes with curfews, that goes with blackouts, that goes with internet being blocked or telephone lines being jammed, as we're seeing happen today. It's something that's imposed. It's oppressive. And I think in many ways, silence of exploited people, silence is actually the language of disempowerment. And that's something I think that we see in Angan a lot. So I'll go back to when I first started Angan. I went into we used to call it a remand home. Can you put your hand up if you've ever been to a remand home for children where, it's a rescue home and where there are children from all sorts of, some of them have been arrested, some of them have been picked up from brothels, some of them have been picked up from factories. I don't know if you've been there, about 8 in Bombay. Anyway, so I went to one in Bombay, which was in Dohri. It's interesting because it's an old British prison. So it had very high prison walls. It actually looks like a prison. And in 2002, there were 500 children, like I said, from all kinds of different sort of types of exploitation there. And it was about 4:30 in the evening. What do children normally do at 4:30 in the evening? Play, right? You'd expect to see cricket or whatever, I don't know. And I went in there, and one of the things that really strikes you every time you go into a rescue home and a shelter home, and since then I've been to at least 200 in all parts of the world, in all parts of India, is this really odd smell. And of course, it's like a lot of places in India smell, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's this smell, I think I realized later, which you link with deep poverty, with illness, with vulnerability, and with fear. And so when I went in there, and I just saw almost like a cage, a long cage of children, and just silence. It felt very weird to me because I had never seen so many children, 500 children in one place, and you could hear a pin drop. That is not quiet. That's not like children taking their Lego and play. That's some serious silence. And so when I went to the superintendent and I said, Acha, I want to do a program here, he was like, Acha, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? I couldn't think of anything. I was actually so startled by what I had experienced that I said, anything to just bring some joy and some play into this place. And he said, okay, come back. He didn't care much. And I came back. We put together this group of artists and creative people. We had an art therapist, we had musicians, we had somebody who would do storytelling, and they all came together. And we got our first group. It was a group of 25 girls who had been trafficked, and they had been brought to this remand home for their rehabilitation. And they sat and we passed out the papers, and the art therapist was excited, I was excited. And we spent 45 minutes of that session in silence. Nobody touched the pencil to the paper. Hardly anybody made eye contact. After 45 minutes, the staff member came and said, now they have to go back. Let's take them back. We said, but we haven't done anything. So they said, now do you see? Now do you see why we find it so hard to work with girls like this? And we started thinking, we said, what was that silence saying to us? And we must have gone back session after session 4 times, and we kept saying, this is a flop, what are we going to do? At the end of the day, I think what the silence was saying to us is, we don't trust you adults. What have you done to us? We have already been exploited, we have already been abused, you made the police pick us up in a raid, and then you put us here in something that's like a prison, where when we try to sleep because we are sad and we're depressed and we can't do anything else, we're beaten up. So why should we open our mouths and talk to an adult? And slowly we started working on that silence and building trust with the group. And we found, they started drawing. Everybody used to draw their homes, and they used to draw a swing in their home, and they used to draw the post office near their home. Some of them used to draw a map to say, please let me go home. And in many ways, those drawings, although they were very nervous about drawing, saying we're not artists, was beautiful artwork in my mind, because it was the first time the silence of that group was broken. And so I think when you give young people a chance, when you give victims a chance to actually break that silence for the first time, a lot of super powerful things happen. Like there was a girl who came into this particular home behaving very odd. Her head was half shaven, and everyone was saying, we can't do anything with her. She doesn't even, if something has gone wrong with her, bad luck. She's not even willing to give a testimony. She's not opening her mouth. We don't know. And we would do these sessions, they were little circles, safety circles, and we just keep talking. Muskan, she joined, and her story came out. And she was a girl who had been, her mom had left, her grandparents were looking after her. They were so annoyed with her, they would keep beating her up because she was such a burden on them financially. They were also desperately poor. She would roam around the streets in the basti she lived in Badala, until her neighbors, family, friends said to her, you're in such a bad state, why don't you come to our house? We'll make sure you have some work. And they started using her for trafficking right there, in her house, right, the neighboring house to her grandparents' home, drugging her, giving her alcohol. And her grandma would say, where are you the whole day? Where are you the whole night? And beat her up so badly. And in fact, she had shaved her head, saying, now we'll see where you're going to go. And there was a raid, and luckily she was picked up and brought into this home. And when she finally told her story, it was so powerful for her, because when we help people, when we help victims break their silence, it makes them see themselves differently. We see them, we hear them, and they start seeing themselves for the first time. And trauma research shows that when you actually get a chance to tell your trauma story, so many things happen to you. You're able to take the disorganized memories that trauma is associated with, and you're able to put them into some narrative and some form that helps you understand what happened, and you're able to understand, this was not my fault. This was something that should never have happened, and it happened. So the power of telling your story, the power of actually changing a narrative of what happened to you, that I think is a very important thing that we started understanding that we must do for victims and for survivors. And as we started doing that, we started hearing more and more from children about their stories. But then we started thinking to ourselves, what are we going to do with all these stories? There's something quite self-indulgent in just collecting a bunch of stories and then keeping it for yourself, right? And saying, hey, I'm making a lot of change in these children's lives. And one of the things we realized is we need, when children approach us and they tell us their stories, or when any victims do it, what's really hard is when those stories are not well received. And so we said, what can we as an organization do to start getting people to listen to what victims and survivors in rescue homes and shelter homes are saying? And that was the moment, I think, for Angan, where we started working on government systems. For the first time, we took a child's voice back to the government, and we said to the official, the authority sitting in Bombay, in Mantralaya, that children are saying that they would rather sleep in a dustbin, they would rather be in a brothel, they would rather work in a factory than actually be in your so-called care home. One boy made a really powerful statement. He said, of course I don't want to be here. If I were rescued, this place would be like an ashram. Instead, it's like a prison. So if you really want me to feel rescued, he was 8 years old, I think it was a big idea. And we took that big idea to the authority and we said, this is it. Homes, rescue homes must be rehabilitated. And so we started going state government to state government, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, and we started going to governments where people would say to us, oh God, they're not even going to listen to you. Forget that they'll ever listen to children. And we said, we will monitor your homes. We will get you the child's voice back. And we will keep giving that to you month on month on month until you take some kind of action. Take action that they don't have a toilet to go to, they don't have food to eat, they're beaten black and blue. There's abuse going on in the home. And slowly we started sort of making sure that the government actually took action on that. And we introduced in 16 states, we introduced something called India's first sort of standards of care in rescue homes. And we used it in, I think we went to more than 658 or 700 rescue homes and shelters across the country. Many of which we found that in 70%, nobody had ever bothered to ask a child, what's happening? How are you? Are you okay? Which I think is just incredible. And it's extremely silencing for like thousands and thousands of children. And anyway, after doing a lot of work, and I think there were more than 150,000 children in these homes that we monitored, we finally started thinking about what we could do, like I said, to actually prevent this harm in the first place. And we realized it's not enough to be working with victims. And when you think about it, when you think about where such children come from, where do children who get trafficked and who get married early and who get caught up in dangerous work like mining or brick kilns, where do they actually come from? Naturally, it takes you back to some of the most vulnerable groups. It takes you back to scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, minority groups. Even within that, there are hierarchies where there's huge degrees of untouchability and really so much that, again, silences large groups of people. And so when we decided, we said we will go back to districts where we see a lot of the harm happening. Now, in fact, we work, I think, in 700, 800 such locations in 6 states across India. So we work in UP, in Bihar, in Rajasthan, in Jharkhand, in Odisha, in Maharashtra. And we decided that we'd go back and we'd start working with local women volunteers and say, what can you do here? What can you do to make sure we hear from children what's going wrong? And what we found over there was that the silence that over there was really about systems, right? Structural violence, which makes sure that groups of people never get their rights. They never get their rights. So it's less about the individual sort of lack of access to justice, but it's what happens when your child can get picked up, your 14-year-old son can get picked up and kept in a prison lockup in a village. Why? Because you didn't have a birth certificate for him. And he ends up being, a criminal. Your child can just be denied admission to any school. In fact, I went to a place called Sehor right outside Bhopal when we started piloting our project. And I asked one of the village women, why are you pulling your daughter out of school and getting her married at 14? It doesn't make any sense. And why did you send her to the school? Why are you stopping her education? So she said, no, what's the point? In this school, our caste, we are only allowed to, she has to sit on the floor and she has to spend most of her day cleaning the bathroom. So I said, oh really, how come? So she said, no, that's what our caste students have to do in this particular place. So I was really surprised because right above her, where we were sitting and talking, sort of outside the panchayat office, was a list of names, and her name was on that. So I said, but isn't your name on that? Aren't you part of the school management committee that to do something about it? She said, yeah, I'm very much on there, but obviously I cannot address the principal, because if I go and stand, in front of him, he's of a much higher caste. And so there's no way we could address each other. He'd chuck my child out of school and, my child would probably be beaten. And it was interesting to me because, this is what happens, I think, with structural violence. It doesn't seem as dramatic as selling a child or as, having a child ill or injured, but it's small chronic stuff that keeps chipping away slowly at groups of people until they're silenced. They won't say anything when they're told your child is of this caste, so let her sit on the ground. And that group, they started to work together as part of our program. Women volunteers started coming together. They started actually thinking about rights around caste, thinking about the right to education, thinking about what school management committees were supposed to be. And they went to the principal, and months later when I saw the same lady, she said to me, yeah, not only are they listening, when I went into the principal's office, he told me, please sit and have a glass of water. Now to us that may not sound like a huge shift in what's happened socially in that community, but I think it was the beginning of a very real interaction, and later they went on to actually audit that school, to look at midday meals, to look at who's outside school, which are the children who are not able to come regularly to school, and so it was really a big change. Sometimes our funders say to us, and I'm sure a lot of you interact with cynical funders and investors, and sometimes they say to us, so what are you all doing in your prevention program? Okay, you all are going into the districts and you all are having people talk, because part of our program is we bring adolescent girls to talk about safety. We bring boys together to talk about safety. We bring parents together, and then we bring government and families together. And so, they will often say to us, so basically you're making them talk. What happens when they talk? But think about what happens when people who have never spoken before, or who have never spoken on these particular issues, what happens when they talk? What happens when dialogue suddenly starts happening? Huge change happens when you think of the Chipko movement. I always think of circles and how when people come together and right at the center of the huddle is that issue that you are all going to be mobilized around. It's extremely powerful. And we have found in Angan that in every community where we've worked, those circles which seem, what's the big deal? Some women are coming together, having some chai and talking. We have found profound impact. Girls are going back to school. Boys are being removed from BD rolling and hazardous work and getting into bridge courses so that they can slowly start going back to school. Girls are negotiating with their parents to say, I don't want to get married now, maybe a little later. So it's not like rosy yet, but we're definitely getting there. People have access to school, to the police. Normally people would say we would never go to the police. In fact, if turn around and exploit us. And that started happening. So huge change again when we help systems to break silence and when we help bring people together for dialogue. And the thing about this kind of change is that it's not visible right at the start, right? It takes time. I remember the first group we did, it was in Govandi. You all know that Govandi is now, I think, Asia's biggest slum. And it has pockets. Some pockets have, it depends where people, there's a Bangladeshi pocket, there's a Bihari pocket, there's very different pieces of it. But we were working in a pocket where we had very traditional families. And girls, it was one of our first safety circle groups, and girls would come into groups and they take off their burqas and they'd say, okay, what are we doing today? Let's tell jokes. Let's tell really bad jokes. And they would laugh really loudly. And sometimes I would go in and say, hey, when are we going to start discussing safety? But the moment of just being free, singing some silly, sometimes raunchy song, quite honestly, telling a silly joke, trying on makeup or whatever a teenage girl just wants to feel free to do was happening in that center. And was that dialogue, was that going to be life-changing dialogue? We couldn't really tell at that moment. But many years later, I think more than 7 or 8 years later, recently, the first girl from that batch, Shaheen, came to our office. And of course she went, she was supposed to come at 11:30. She was found in the bathroom putting her makeup till 11:50. So nothing had changed. She came to the office and I said, oh, what's happening? How are you? And she said, I'm married now, I have 2 kids. So I said, oh my God, you got married so soon? She said, yeah, but I wanted to get married. And before I got married, I did 2 things. One, I negotiated that my little sister, who is also part of our program, would complete school and would complete her bachelor's and is still not married and is now working. And the second is in my in-laws, when they started talking about my sister-in-law getting married, they were saying, oh, let's have it on this date, let's have this for the dessert, let's have this as her outfit, etc. I said, hang on, have any of you asked this girl if she wants to drop out of school and get married? And they just looked at her and she said, so let's actually ask the person. And she was able to negotiate for her sister-in-law that she didn't get married. I mean, she's now, I think her sister-in-law is 18, 19. I don't know how much longer she'll be able to delay it. But she was definitely able to speak up. And I think that to me is the sign of moving towards, justice.